Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders as they roll out a zero trust architecture. With me on today's show are Kevin Bingham, Zero Trust Technical Lead, NSA Cybersecurity Directorate; DeVarious Peoples, Chief Information Officer, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers; Stephen Hernandez, Chief Information Security Officer, Department of Education; Paul Morris, Chief Information Security Officer, CDC; Jim Richburg, Public Sector Field CISO and VP of Information Security at Fortinet; John Davis, VP Public Sector Palo Alto Networks; and Joseph Hamblin, Department of Defense CTO at Verizon. Well, NIST published 800-207, the ZTA, as they call it, Zero Trust Architecture, back in August of 2020. And then an executive order came out from the White House just recently, almost a year later, citing a lot of Zero Trust Architecture implementation requirements, et cetera, et cetera. You all have been at this for quite some time. Kevin, let's start with you. Tell us about the state of the state about Zero Trust Architecture in the community and certainly at NSA.
Yeah, so thank you. So for us, we've been focused on trying to continually advance and improve our customers' networks over time, and we've for gosh, a good decade had this belief that the assumed breach model was a really good one that customers needed to take into account. But what we found was that there were a lot of folks that continued to just do things the way they'd done them in the past, right? The ability to have the confidence to break away from that legacy mindset of those programs and those activities that you've been doing in the past to do something different and new is hard, even when you accept that an assumed breach model is what you have to go with. And 2 years ago, when we started studying how can we get a push for improving the security on the inside of some of our networks, we looked at the Zero Trust model and thought, that it gave a nice disciplined approach to start being able to no kidding, understand different pillars of functional capability areas that people needed to start putting attention into. And that's what really attracted us to it, that we'd be able to have a security model, a paradigm change in the way we do it, to accept that assumed breach model and actually do some things that are different. Start, no kidding, locking down those privileged accounts and those accesses from the users and the devices, and stop the adversary's ability to maneuver through the network. So we're pretty excited about it. We think that as the adoption of this security model starts to gain momentum, and as people start seeing positive results of their work in this space, that we'll see not only improvements across the federal and DoD space, but also in the vendor community too, to support the needs of their customer base.
It really is a framework. Can be somewhat daunting, but I always like to use the statement of architecture, right? Because it is in fact an architecture that one is looking to implement. Stephen, how about over at Department of Education? You all have been on this journey, as we like to call it. Tell us about the state of the state as to how things are going over there.
Yeah, and first I'd like to touch on this idea of the architecture. Almost 3 years ago now, when Sylvia Burns and the CIO Council actually came up with this wild idea, and came up with, hey, let's look into, is it the right time at that time to explore zero trust networks? And that was an interesting distinction, because the first request was, let's just really focus in on that layer 3 and see, what the art of the possible is. We pulled together several working groups, government focused, especially with our friends out at the NIST Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, ACT, IACT, ATARC. A lot of groups started pulling this apart. And particularly on the government side, we said, you know what? This is much bigger than layer 3. And if we're going to do this right, we really have to talk about the whole 7-layer model. We got to touch every single element of it. That's not networks, that's an architecture. And that's how we landed on zero trust architecture versus something like zero trust network. We knew we had to evolve it to be more encompassing. At the department, we look at it and we look at the 4 big pillars, especially if you look at the ACT-IACT model. The NIST model aligns nicely, and others break it out in different ways. But for us, it's 4 big pieces. We're looking at data. Both, do we know what those crown jewels are, and can we collect the data necessary from our fabric of sensors throughout the enterprise to know what's going on around us? We have ICAM. Identity is absolutely core to what we're doing. And for us, that's largely in our ICAM program. But there's other elements of identity that we're still looking at building out, and how to, especially around non-person entities, how do we continue to evolve that space? And we have the trust engine, and NIST calls it the policy engine. That's an area where we're pushing hard, and we're looking at things like the Technology Modernization Fund as to how do we take some of the cool technology that's out there, AI, AML, robotic process automation, and bring it in from an enterprise perspective across the entire enterprise, which is frankly really hard to do. Lots of ZTA solutions out there do have elements of machine learning and AI built into that particular product space or service space, but is it enterprise wide, and can it commingle with other things? Varying degrees of capability there. And then finally, there is that control fabric, the control plane. And that's another area of work for us that we're driving hard, probably the most nascent and on the horizon for us, because we just awarded EIS. We're getting lots of incredible technology through that service offering, software-defined network, perimeter, and WAN. All of that's going to be necessary technology, along with some new ways of encryption. You bring it all together, and that's kind of where we're at right now. And I think if you look across the federal space writ large, you're going to see similar in terms of where folks at. Some folks are a little further ahead, especially in the control plane. Other folks are still trying to get their arms around, do I have an enterprise data lake where I can put all this great data and then use it to throw AML at it and eventually have AI make smart decisions?
Yeah, I mean, the framework is really important as these emerging technologies get introduced and sort of get Lego blocked into this architecture being so key to this. Paul, you were at a very complex operating component. You're now at another very complex operating component. Tell us how you're doing on this journey about putting this framework together.
I really like what Kevin and Steve have said, and took it really from a strategic level down to what we're doing so hard work at the CISO councils, up to the CISO council as to where we're going. It takes some policy, and it takes a lot of people to roll up their sleeves, but there's a lot of existing projects that we've been after here for years in different places in the enterprise under different teams, that when you step back and think, and I love this, it is an architecture, it is a framework, and how do you bring them together so that we can start to think about establishing trust in any user, in any device, accessing any data, and bringing those together so a decision can be made at that point in time. Is this the right connection? So going down to some of the things that we have going, we're taking advantage of the Tech 3.0 opportunities that are available to us, and bringing a solution that brings cloud access directly down to the user. That's really an opportunity to take SaaS technology and really also provide that tech security monitoring capability that's so important. On the upside to our users, we don't have to back all that data back to our data center up through a single tick from the department, reducing that latency as we're finding ourselves all in these multi-cloud environments. So that's a big plus to me, is bringing those things together. We're also working really hard right now on bringing identity access controls into our next generation firewalls. I mean, that's a very technical thing, but in the past it was a port and a protocol and maybe an IP address, and you kind of left it alone. Well, we know based on the attacks and breaches and ransomware attacks, they're taking advantage, as Steve would say, above layer 5, and they're coming in at the application and user. So thinking about how to use namespaces instead of IP addresses, specific users or groups, that's that part of the decision policy point of saying, do they really need access to this data along with network segmentation? And we're starting to build that architecture and that framework where I think we're going to see results long-term of keeping folks out of our networks.
Sure, and that dynamic sort of authentication piece of this, I think, is really important as well. And it's refreshing to see these different technologies being able to snap together to build out the architecture. Jim, how about over at Fortinet? You all are right smack in the middle of it there, right? You're seeing on sort of both ends. Tell us what you're seeing out there. What's the state of the state these days?
So Luke, we've been focused on helping these departments and agencies build the foundations, the functional capabilities that are laid out in 800-207, and especially in the areas of identity management, access control, and applying and enforcing least privilege. And I'll give you 3 quick examples. On the user identity front, we recently helped one cabinet agency create the identity to upgrade what it was doing, a multi-factor authentication, and integrate it with its existing user identity program for about a 50,000 user population. On device management and access control, we've helped numerous others work on identifying and defining security policy for headless devices. We recognize we're now in a world where IoT and operational technology are our new reality. That with the post-COVID normal, you're going to have things like smart building technology and HVAC, things that you can't really update. So you need to track the behavior of those devices. You need to do that virtual patching to work around their vulnerabilities, and you need to alert to abnormal behavior. And we've helped a couple of other agencies with broad operational networks move that policy enforcement engine that Stephen talked about closer to that edge where the localized data is. Be able to have these smaller firewalls that could do the segmentation and still share data as if it's one federated network. So this is what we're trying to do in industry, help them build the foundations you need to make the pillars of 800-207 work.
And really stitch it all together. Great examples there. John, how about over at Palo Alto? Once again, another entity that's really right in the middle of this zero trust architecture fabric, if you will. Give us the state of the state.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Just like my good friend Jim Richburg said, we're also committed to helping our government partners on this journey. In terms of a progress report, well, we're going to see shortly how the departments and agencies are meeting the executive order requirements for zero trust architecture, because the homework is coming due very soon. You know, it was the 12th of May that the Biden administration issued that EO on improving the nation's cybersecurity. I have a feeling that it had probably some fuel underneath the fire based on things such as solar winds and other special events that we've experienced over the past 6 months. And the EO lays out a series of actions that federal departments and agencies are going to have to take to strengthen their cyber defenses, including within 60 days, so due in the next couple of days, each agency head has got to develop a plan to implement zero trust architecture and incorporate the migration steps that the NIST has outlined in the standards and guidance. So, you know, from my perspective, the EO section on modernizing federal government cybersecurity in particular includes that strong emphasis on the importance of adopting a zero trust architecture across all network and cloud environments by leveraging those NIST standards. The executive order, I think, represents an important step, but it is a journey. We've been partnered with NIST and its National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence since early 2018 in working to define industry-leading standards for zero trust architectures. And I just want to compliment NIST on its outreach to many out here in the industry in a partnered effort to try to help do this. So we think we can help, and NIST plays a key role in being able to do that.
They really do. And I think the beauty of that, I think, I believe, if I understand correctly, if some of you were involved in the creation of that publication, great timing to have that out for a period of time, get vetted, socialized within the community before this very crisp executive order came out, directing the agencies to put the plans together and implement the zero trust architecture. Joseph, how about over at Verizon? Once again, another major player in the middle of enabling the zero trust architecture across the community.
Yeah, we have a large base of existing, TIC 2.0 customers that we've been working with to help them develop plans to meet the executive order, migrate that up into, a TIC 3.0 solution, which includes, SASE solutions and SD-WAN capabilities. One of the challenges a lot of customers are facing is where to get started. And the executive order really puts an emphasis on collapsing that time frame and coming up with a direction. So performance, we want to maintain performance. And some of my colleagues on the panel have also mentioned, I think, an area that I think is very critical is around identity. Generally, typically on the network side, there's a separation between the actual user in front of the device and the device itself. So we're focused in on collapsing that down so that we have a device, we know who the actual user of that device is, so we can start making identity decisions, what resources they should get access to.
Sure, and once again, that identity piece continues to come up. Very important part of the overall architecture, no question about it. Devarius, how about over at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers? As the Chief Information Officer, right, you're it, so to speak, and no doubt that you all are well on a journey there to implement the capability. Tell us the state of the state.
Yeah, so good morning. It's been interesting state at the Corps of Engineers. We've received the executive order. The good thing is things were progressing before the order came out. So when we look at Zero Trust, some of the things that we've done, and we've had good conversations with the federal CIO council members on Zero Trust. We've also had good conversations with internal to the Department of the Army on some of these things. So we've developed what we call a Zero Trust playbook. The Zero Trust playbook goes through about 12 different areas because when most people talk about Zero Trust, you only see it maybe from about 3 different perspectives, but we've gone from all aspects of Zero Trust to include the training aspects, the training from the executive level down to the technician that is responsible for implementing those things as well. Because ultimately, in order to implement and execute, you have to be trained, and we put a heavy emphasis on the training of our personnel. One of the things we've also begun to do is look at Zero Trust from the perspective of not just IT, but OT as well. Because from the Corps of Engineers, we have a heavy civil mission. And that civil mission includes working with a lot of the levees, locks, and dams at the local state level. And with that being said, we support those state levels when it comes to disaster recovery, waterway missions, critical infrastructure, and those type of things. And that's one area that we believe could be enhanced even as we work to meet the order of the executive order that was published. So we're looking at it from all aspects, OT, IT, and how do we implement our Zero Trust framework through a playbook, and that playbook also constitutes training as well.
I think training is a good catch there, and just awareness, right? Definition of what it is, not only internally within your own employees, but your customers there. And let's face it, the critical infrastructure, as we well know, and we've seen just recently, really important to make sure that the architecture is bolstered across those various sectors. Well, listen, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.